Well, a war on whistleblowers in America. Another government official has allegedly blown the whistle and facing the consequences for doing so. A former CIA officer by the name of John Kiriakou was indicted on Thursday on charges of leaking secrets to journalists. But it's not the first time he's been in hot water for blowing the whistle. He's the man that exposed the CIA's use of waterboarding on terrorist suspects. Well, it's another example of the Obama administration going after whistleblowers. So is there an effort to silence whistleblowers today? For some answers, someone who knows a lot about this subject, Jesselyn Radack, has blown the whistle before and now fights for whistleblower rights. Jesselyn is the director of the National Security and Human Rights for the Government Accountability Project. She's also the author of the book Traitor: The Whistleblower and the American Taliban, and she joins us now live in our studio. Nice to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I understand that you yourself, you were a whistleblower in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience?
Sure. Basically, I had been the Justice Department ethics advisor in the case of the so-called American Taliban, John Walker Lind. He was the first person captured in Afghanistan after 9/11, and he was an American, so he was seen as the worst of the bad, when in fact he really hadn't done that much. He ended up pleading guilty to 2 relatively minor charges, but I had advised not to interrogate him without a lawyer, and parenthetically not to torture him. And when I realized that that advice was not only disregarded, but disappeared from the file in the office, it was not turned over to the court, I blew the whistle on that. And for that, I experienced a lot of retaliation, including being put under a criminal investigation and referred to the state bars in which I'm licensed as an attorney and put on the no-fly list. So that's kind of how I got into this line of work. I decided after that experience to dedicate my life to representing whistleblowers.
And what was the outcome of that investigation?
The criminal case closed with no charges ever being brought. The Maryland bar dismissed the charges in 2005, but the DC bar charges are still pending in 2012, just to show you how politicized this whole thing was. And then I am able to fly again.
Well, that's good news.
Yes.
But ever since then, I know that you have dedicated your life and your work to protecting the rights of whistleblowers. I want to talk about this latest case, the former CIA officer charged with violating the Espionage Act. And I know that you say that this is an outdated law dating back all the way to the World War I era. But now this law, you say, is being used to target whistleblowers.
Absolutely. This law was a 1917 law meant to go after spies, not whistleblowers. However, our government around 1970 used it to go after the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, a very famous man and a very famous case. And it's only had been used 2 times since then to go after people who allegedly had mishandled classified information. And in one of those cases, the person got a pardon, and in the other, the case was aborted during the middle of the case. But the Obama administration, unfortunately, has brought 6 prosecutions or filed charges against 6 different people under this act. And these people are not Robert Hansen or Aldrich Ames. They are not spies. They're, in fact, people who've blown the whistle on fraud, waste, abuse, and sometimes illegality and war crimes.
Now, it's interesting you brought up President Obama because years ago, he seemed to be in support of whistleblowing, and I believe we have a soundbite of him speaking on this subject.
I wrote the brief for the federal law, the federal whistleblowers law, to make sure that it applied in more situations. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. So I know a little bit about whistleblowing and making sure that those folks get protection.
Now, here he is back in 2008 talking about protecting whistleblowers. But in reality, the way it's played out is that he's actually been quite aggressive in going after whistleblowers, much more so than the Bush administration. Why is that?
That's a great question, and people like myself who campaigned for Obama and contributed to him and voted for him are asking the same thing. And I think initially it was to appease the intelligence establishment, which saw him as weak coming into office. But since all of these cases involve so-called leaking or making disclosures to journalists, I think it's really a backdoor way to create bad precedent for going after people in the media. And I also think it's sort of this way to create an Official Secrets Act, which we don't have in this country and haven't had for more than 200 years.
So I know you also say that this war on whistleblowers is also a war on journalists.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's become more and more apparent. I think in the one of the initial indictments, the one against Thomas Drake, they tried very hard not to bring the reporter in. It was Siobhan Gorman, then with the Baltimore Sun and now with the Wall Street Journal. But if you look at the case of Jeffrey Sterling, they have subpoenaed Jim Risen. Bush subpoenaed him, New York Times columnist Jim Risen, twice, and Obama subpoenaed him once. The judge, Judge Brinkema, ruled that he did have a reporter's privilege not to disclose his source, who people widely believe to be Jeffrey Sterling. And now that's up on appeal. And then in Kiriakou's case, there are journalists all over the place. The charges have journalist A, journalist B, journalist C, and then in the indictment, journalist A and journalist B. Journalist B, again, a high-profile New York Times journalist, not Jim Risen, but Scott Shane. In Kiriakou's case.
So we're seeing a lot of examples here. Here at RT, we cover this whole issue of whistleblowing a lot, particularly with Bradley Manning, the Army private, accused of blowing the whistle and sending hundreds of thousands of documents to WikiLeaks, and which has made these made these documents public. Excuse me. Which one do you think is the most shocking?
Of the cases, or of what?
Of the cases.
Wow. I'm most familiar with Thomas Drake's and with John Kiriakou's, and I find both of them to have been brought in bad faith and an overzealous use and very flimsy cases in which multiple, upwards of between 5 and 10 plea bargain offers, were made early on in the case, which showed how weak the case turned out to be. Drake's was especially egregious because it turned out that nothing that the government claimed had been classified was indeed classified. In fact, it ticked off the former classification czar under George W. Bush so much that he sued his former agency to make them enforce the misclassification, the punishment for misclassifying stuff because of the egregious way that information had been classified in the Thomas Drake case.
And lastly, Jesselyn, we don't have too much time left, but we're seeing all these cases against whistleblowers. So where do you think this is heading? The future of whistleblowing in America?
I think people are going to keep doing it, I hope, because they have a conscience. But in America, I think to the extent that the Obama administration has ticked off about WikiLeaks, the answer is to enact meaningful and effective whistleblower protection reform and not to be prosecuting whistleblowers. So I hope that people will keep coming forward and standing firm.
All right, very interesting. Jesselyn, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your personal experience with us. Sure. That was Jesselyn Radack, author of the book Traitor, The Whistleblower and the American Taliban, and the National Security Director at the Government Accountability Project.